If I can just welcome everybody to our second webinar. My name is Shazia Hussain. I'm the Assistant Chief Executive at Brent Council, and I have responsibility, and one of the areas I have responsibility for is the climate sustainability work within the council. What I'll do is I'll just go through some housekeeping items with you before we start, and then I'll just do a quick introduction and set out the evening for us. So if I can ask everybody to, if people have got questions, then please put them in the chat. We've got officers who will be looking at the chat, and they will either respond directly in the chat, or if it's a question for the panel, then they will park those questions and we will present them to the panel at the end. We've got 4 great speakers today. We're starting with a kind of a broad oversight, which has been given by Tom Welsh, who's our council senior lead for sustainability within the council. We will then move on to a more a kind of a sort of national picture, and sort of setting the London-wide picture, and that will be Ruth Westcote, who will be speaking. And then following Ruth, we'll have Noreen Glaves, who will be speaking and giving talking to us about food and sustainability. And then at the very end, we'll have a very localized picture by one of our own residents, Katie Pascoe, who will be talking to us about a local growing project as well. So I won't say too much about the projects, but all I did want to say was just a little bit of context about why we're doing this. I'm sorry, I should have said at the very end, we will have a Q&A. There will be half an hour allocated to take any questions that anybody poses, and the speakers will make up the panel. But just a little bit about Brent Council and why we're doing this. In July 2019, we pledged and we declared a climate emergency, and we pledged that we would gift and try and achieve carbon neutrality in the borough by 2030, and we would try and do as much as we could possibly for our communities. And in the process of doing that, we did quite a lot of engagement with the public, but we also set out a climate sustainability strategy, which we launched earlier this year. As part of that strategy, we've got a number of things that we're trying to do along with our partners in terms of making a better and more environmentally friendly environment for us to be living in, and for a sustainable future for all of us and all of our residents. But in the process of that, we want to make sure that our residents are able to make informed choices. So as part of that process, we've got a series of webinars that we've done. We've done one on transport, and we're doing the one today on food and its impact in terms of the environment. So that's really the theme of today. It is a beginner's guide. So the presentations will be giving you some level of detail, but obviously we will also make sure that we follow that up with further information on our website that's available for people. But also we hope to build on these webinars. So if there is anything in particular that you think we should be focusing on, then please do say in the chat or email one of us, and we'll happily take those suggestions on. So I'm going to start by asking the leader of the council, Councillor Mohammed Butt, to just do a brief introduction. And Councillor Butt has been one of our green champions and has been doing lots of things to try and change his lifestyle. And I'm sure he'll talk about that when he does his introduction. So if I can introduce Councillor Butt to do his introduction.
Shazia, thank you very much for the introduction, and I want to say a big thank you to all the speakers we have on the panel today, and I want to say a big thank you to every single one of you who's joined us today to be part of this event and talking about food and how we can actually sort of make things better for us. As Shazia said, we declared a climate emergency back in July 2019. It's been 2 years, and then in between we've had the pandemic, and I think the pandemic has highlighted some of the things that we should need to do as well. I mean, in the last couple of days, I think the weather, the floods that we've seen, not just in London but across the world as well, right, just demonstrates, right, the importance and the magnitude and the scale of challenge that we're facing as a species, as a human race as well, in order to make sure that we survive, right, but also to make sure that the world continues to provide for us as well. And as Shazia said, right, I mean, I've been making sort of personal changes and commitments, right, in order to affect that change as part of the change and the commitment we've made for the climate emergency. And I think, but the one thing that we've realised, and I think we all need to appreciate, is that we can't do this on our own. The council can't do this on our own. The government can't do this on our own. Right? All the speakers here, I think, will allude to the fact, right, that all of us need to work together in order to achieve, right, the positive outcomes that we're looking for. And food, right, is I think one of the most important things to all of us, right? But do we ever sit down and think about how it's produced, where it's come from, how far it travels, right? And what do we do with the food that's left over and everything else? We've seen with the pandemic as well, actually, right? The need for food as well, right? With some of the mutual aid groups and the people struggling to actually purchase food themselves. Right? So how do we make sure that everything that we do has that sustainable element to it as well, but we're also making sure, right, it has that environmental aspect to it, about making sure about its production and how we actually use the land and the resources we have to the most effective and best outcomes we have. I mean, I could go on, right, as a politician, and Shazia said she's going to be quite strict with the timing as well. But honestly, right, today we're here to talk about food, to make it as simple as possible for everyone to understand all the issues and the concerns that we may have, and how we can actually all come together in relation to the climate emergency that we have, that we've declared, right, and give everyone an opportunity, right, to ask some of those questions, right, they may have but haven't been able to ask. And we have, as I said, we have some really great speakers: Tom, Ruth, Maureen, and Katie, all here to give their perspective, and myself from Brent Council, working with Shazia and all the other officers. We're here to make sure we support and actually implement what we said in the climate emergency, and the strategy we have as well for going forward as well. So thank you very much, and please enjoy the evening, and please ask as many questions as you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butt. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our first speaker, but before I do, can I just ask that if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat. We will pick them up. We might cluster some of the questions if we think there are some similar things coming through. I would just ask people to please be respectful when they're asking their questions. And if you have something that you particularly want to ask the council, then it may be that we take that offline and we'll respond to you directly, because this webinar today is really primarily focusing on a broader picture, which includes the council, but not only the council entirely. So on that note, I'm going to introduce Tom Welsh, who is, as I mentioned earlier, our Climate Emergency and Strategy Manager at Brent Council. And he's going to be talking about how our existing national and international systems cause climate change. So just to give you a bit of an overview. So Tom, if I can ask you to start your presentation, please.
Thanks, Shazia. Could I just double check you can't see my notes? Can everyone just see the full screen?
We can see your notes.
Oh, you can. Has that made any difference?
That's great now, Tom.
Is that better? Okay. Okay. So yeah, thanks very much, Shazia. And
sorry, your screen's now gone half, so we can't see it all.
Oh. Let me try that. Let me try again. Hold on a sec. How's that?
That's great. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so thank you. Sorry about that. I'll try and whiz through this. So yeah, thank you. I'm Tom Elshire, I'm the Council's Climate Emergency Strategy Manager. So I'll be providing the kind of opening presentation, which is really just to set the scene for the rest of the session and provide the global context of how our current food system and consumption habits are contributing to climate change. So the feedback we've had when we've done engagement on climate change, anecdotally from people, is that climate change is a fairly overwhelming concept to a lot of people. They aren't sure how it affects them or what specifically they can do to help. So as we see in the focus of this session, people can contribute to tackling climate change through something as simple as what they eat each day. Oops, sorry. Thank you. So the first one, so as we're running this series as a kind of beginner's guide to climate change, I did just want to very quickly outline what the climate and ecological emergency is. For anyone who's watching who doesn't feel particularly sure about what this even means and where to start. So in a nutshell, global average temperatures are continuing to rise worldwide. And the bottom line is that these temperature increases are driven by human activity and an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. These temperature increases impact on the world's delicate natural processes and make volatile weather such as floods, droughts, and heat waves more likely. This in turn impacts on nature and our ability to grow food and drink water in the future. So the biggest greenhouse gas contributor is carbon dioxide, but as we'll see in food systems, this also extends to methane and nitrous oxide, which are two other greenhouse gases which are involved in food production and often more potent than carbon dioxide. So scientists widely view this decade up to 2030 as a tipping point, beyond which the damage done if we don't address climate change, the damage done to our climate will be irreversible. So one of the key contributing factors is food, and it's estimated that the world's food system is responsible for about 1/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions that humans generate each year. So just think for a second about how much food there actually is in the world. So how much you consume, how much your family consumes and your friends consume, how many supermarkets and restaurants and takeaways there are near you. And that's just thinking about the local area. Think about that replicated across the whole planet. So that's a lot of food. And if we keep producing it in the same methods we're using now, it will be disastrous for the climate. So the way we produce, transport, consume, and ultimately waste food is at the heart of this challenge. And if you eat food, like me, you're part of this in some way too. So I want to start actually by looking at what we need to be aiming at. So the urgency of the climate crisis really demands that all of us take this seriously and contribute to getting to this point. There are other ways of articulating a sustainable food system, but I thought this is quite a good and simple way of thinking about it. As with most things to do with tackling climate change, a sustainable system is a circular one. So all of these elements are ultimately interconnected and enforce each other in the use of energy and resources around this circle. So think about your last meal and backtrack and think about how those ingredients ended up on your plate. How was it produced? How was it processed? How was it transported to you? What was in it? Was it meat-based? And finally, did you eat all of it? Did you throw any of it away? All of these elements matter for every single meal of every single day. So I just want everyone to bear in mind, I thought I'd start off with the vision of where we need to get to. So keep this circle in mind. And I now go into some brief high-level detail of the 4 areas set out here and how these are impacting on climate change. So to start at the beginning of the process then. So when forests are cleared around the world to make room for farms and livestock, and this happens on a daily basis in some parts of the world, large stores of carbon are released into the atmosphere, which heats up the planet. So a study led by Arizona State University in America analysed 1,500 large land deals, which totals 91 million acres across Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Eastern Europe, and found that clearing the land for farming may have emitted 2.3 gigatons of carbon emissions. Now, you don't need to know the intricacies of climate change to know that 2.3 gigatons of anything is a lot. So, and I will thank Ruth actually for this point in a conversation we had earlier, that the UK is no saint in this either. Has anyone noticed that the UK doesn't have any forests anymore, for example? It's just, in many cases, in these parts of the world that I've just mentioned, they're simply doing what the UK did hundreds of years ago, but on a grander scale in many ways. So as we'll come to, much of this livestock is what contributes to meat and dairy food production around the world, but there are other products such as soy, which is produced on a mass scale, which also impacts the environment. So as a species as a whole, we're eating too much, but it's also supremely unequal. There are large parts of the world where hunger is a huge issue, and then conversely, you've got other parts of the world where obesity is a huge issue. So particularly here in the West, we have to be thinking closely about our consumption rates, as the production of food and deforestation is all driven by big companies that are going after the market demand for food, and often food types which are damaging to our environment. So I'm in danger here of probably making it sound like it's a faraway concept, but we're all part of this system, and it's incumbent on all of us to think about the levels of food consumption and make sure that we're using foods as sustainably as possible. So in the next stage, so in processing and transporting food, a lot of energy is required for this. So managing soil can be a big element of carbon emissions. When cows, sheep, and goats in particular digest their food, they actually burp up methane, which is, as I mentioned, a potent greenhouse gas. Animal manure and rice paddies are also big methane sources. So fossil fuels are also fossil fuels are used to operate farm machinery, which make fertilizer and ship food around the globe, all of which generates emissions. The energy from electricity and gas, which is needed to heat, cool, and store different food types before it's shipped, is often part of this as well. In general, though, what you eat matters a lot more of where it comes from, since transportation accounts for only a tiny bit of food's total climate footprint. And I think Ruth in the next presentation will mention a bit more about this, and particularly what it means in London. That said, there are also a few things to consider just quickly on transport. So the share of global food miles of transport, majority of it comes by boat, next majority by road, and then by rail. And then down the bottom, you've got a tiny proportion of air, which people might seem surprised about. But if you actually think about the damage that aviation does to climate change, that's actually a huge proportion and shouldn't be sniffed at on a global scale. It then needs to be packaged and actually get to us.
We've got 2 minutes left.
Okay, I'll speed up. It then needs to be packaged and get to us, and then in the grand scheme, this is actually one of the lower impacts. So this the third step. So currently, the rearing of livestock accounts for around 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's roughly the same as all the cars, trucks, airplanes, and ships in the world combined. And in general, beef and lamb have the biggest climate footprint per gram of protein. Plant-based foods tend to have the smallest impact. So consuming less red meat and dairy will typically have the biggest impact. It doesn't necessarily mean going vegan. It might just mean eating less of the food which have the biggest climate footprints. So things like beans, pulses, and grains tend to be much more climate friendly than meats and dairy. Also, it's also important to consider anything in season, the seasonality of food. So anything that's in season where you live, whether it's from local farmers markets or the supermarket, is usually a good choice. And there are lots of guidelines online about this. So just quickly, this is just a slide demonstrating, we'll send these slides around afterwards. It just demonstrates from left to right. If you've got a high meat diet, you're emitting more kilos of carbon dioxide than down to the right, which is vegetarians and vegans, which probably, from what I've just mentioned, is probably no surprise. Fourthly, food waste. So unbelievably, 1/3 of food produced is thrown away. And in a food waste country, we're the third biggest emitter behind the US and China. So it's an enormous issue. And it costs a lot of money as well. The slightly stupid thing about this is it costs the average UK household £470 a year in throwing away avoidable food waste. So on a global scale, the UN has called for the world's halve per capita food waste by 2030. And again, there are plenty of resources online about how I can reduce food waste. So a lot of things on meal planning, being vigilant about eating and freezing food, remembering that sell-by labels don't necessarily mean that the food has to be tossed out after that date, and considering composting if you're able to as well. This is my penultimate slide, so I'll wrap up in a second. You may be thinking, what are the alternatives to this? And we may come to this in the Q&A. I imagine there'll be questions about this. So there are new plant-based meat substitutes which are showing up in supermarkets and even in some fast food chains. So things like, probably the more mainstream ones are things like Veganuary, which had the record 500,000 people signing up to eat only plant-based foods for the month in January. And the other, the example I've got on the screen there are lots of food wastes for vegetable boxes which can be delivered to your homes. There's an enormous amount of products coming available in that realm. So as we might come to, the issue at the moment is expense and accessibility. So there's a big kind of divide between the consumers influencing markets and then companies needing to do a lot more, which again, the speaker option Ruth will mention and demonstrate very aptly. So you might be thinking, where do I come in? So the key takeaways, if you would excuse the pun, is that what you matters eats a lot. As I mentioned, so beef and dairy and red meat matters a lot. So just to think about that. Obviously, it's not for the council to direct people on what they should or should not be eating, and it's not for me to think saying that as a council officer, but just encouraging people to consider the issues. And as you're saying, what it is you eat has a huge impact on this circle. Smaller shifts are better than nothing. So even it doesn't mean that you have to go vegan tomorrow. It just means, you know, you could consider what your food patterns at the moment and whether you can cut down on meat 1 or 2 days a week, perhaps, as a starting point, and then see how you go. Consider where your food comes in terms of seasonality and where it comes from around the globe. Waste less, so plan your shopping, think about food waste style recipes, and take advantage of any offers on infrastructure like bin caddies that the council has. And just a very cheap plug from me, we are creating a community cookbook where we're encouraging people to put forward either plant-based or food waste recipes. And you get a £75 voucher for the LDO if you're one of the 20 successful entries. So if you're interested in that and you've got a great recipe stored away somewhere in your family, we'll leave a link in the chat if you're interested in that. And I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you, Tom. You just went over slightly over your time, so that's fine. Before I begin the next speaker, I wondered if our leader wanted to just mention the fact that he did the Veganuary, and so maybe just a few words about your experience of doing that.
Thanks for that. I mean, yeah, I did do Veganuary, right, and it's pretty interesting actually. I mean, I managed to sort of do the whole month without sort of going over to meat and everything else, and cut out a lot of the dairy as well. And I have to admit, I was quite surprised. I did lose a lot of weight as well, right? And it was pretty impressive, right? But I think the hardest thing was just trying to find some of the recipes and stuff, right? But Shazia came in to the rescue, and some people of the cabinet members also helped me out, and it was a pleasant experience, I have to admit.
Thank you. I just thought it'd be nice to share your story. Okay, so I'm going to now bring us along to our next speaker, which is Ruth Westcott, who works for Sustain, and Ruth is going to be giving us a brief overview of London, looking at our food consumption, food print, but also what citizens can do to sort of counteract some of the climate and environment effects of food waste. So Ruth, if I can ask you to join us and do your presentation, please.
Thank you so much. I assume you can hear me all right. I'm just going to share my screen, so I hope this goes smoothly. There we go. Shazzy, could you give me a thumbs up if you can see? Brilliant, great. So it's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name's Ruth Westcott and I work at Sustain, which is the Alliance for Better Food and Farming. And we're a UK-based organisation, and we're an alliance of about 100 organisations that have an interest in food, including people you've heard of like the British Heart Foundation, farming unions, the RSPB and Friends of the Earth and WWF. And we campaign across loads of food issues. For example, we campaigned for the sugary drinks tax recently. But loads of the work that we do focuses on London as such an important thought leader for the wider food movement. And I have to say that we found more success in London than on the UK as a whole. And I don't know if you're watching the Olympics, but I actually campaigned to help get the food standards that were used in the 2012 London Olympics good and in place, and then was able to go over to Tokyo to talk about how we might get similar food standards in place for the Tokyo Games. And I can tell you that the influence of having a previous games and a legacy was so important. And we did manage to get some minimum fish standards in, which we could not have expected, because obviously fish being such a mainstay of the Japanese diet and such a thorny issue, but having that as a legacy was so important. So for me, London is so important as a leader, and that it makes this work incredibly important on a global scale. I am going to skim through these a little bit because Tom did such a good job with the overview of the food issues. But suffice to say that when you add up this 24% from agricultural land and food waste, that makes food the single largest contributor to climate change globally. And if you look at this slide, which also brings in nature as well as, you know, the pure kind of carbon issue, as you can see on the left, the food system is also the major contributor to habitat loss and degradation and direct mortality of wildlife and nature globally. So important from a climate change perspective, but also in terms of the kind of globe or the kind of planet we want to live on and the kind of nature and wildlife that we want to see on the earth. This is another great little slide, great little graph showing the major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see, probably no surprises to anyone after that great presentation, but it's all up there, the large meat and dairy foods. But what is interesting, I think, is that really the very large impacts come from land use change and on the farm. And as you can see, transport and packaging relatively small in terms of their footprint. So what's the take-home message there is, it's important to eat the right food produced in the right place, even if you get a little bit flexible about where the food has come from. So, you know, an avocado grown in the right place, in the right environment, is better than trying to grow in a greenhouse in the UK, for example. And that is mostly important for things like tomatoes, which can be grown in heated greenhouses, but it's better just to grow them where they grow naturally in Spain and import them over road. But I wouldn't worry about that too much. I mean, the main takeaway here is if you're increasing the amount of plants in your diet, you're doing a very good job there at reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. Having said that, not all meat is created equal. If you look at beef, for example, in particular, low impact beef actually comes in relatively, you know, comparable with other foods. And that's particularly important because in the UK, actually, most of the beef that we produce is outdoor reared and grass fed and has a relatively low impact compared to beef that's fed on soya and on grain that is grown in deforested land. And I particularly wanted to put that in because we're about to sign a trade deal with Australia, which would allow the import of Australian beef, which is much more commonly fed on soya and grain lots, and it's intensively produced. And that would mean that going in your supermarket and making a decision about eating beef would suddenly become a very different decision because you'd be eating a much higher greenhouse gas emission product. So look for the UK produced, you know. I think if you're going to treat yourself to beef, not all is created equal, and actually British is much better. Love this slide. It's a bit old now, it's from 2003, but it's the ecological footprint of Londoners. And because we are really good about using public transport and we live in small flats that use relatively little energy, actually the big chunk of a bigger than normal chunk of our greenhouse gas emissions come from food. So actually we're pretty good as citizens comparatively compared to other places in the UK, but it means that relatively small changes in our diets could have a really big impact on our personal carbon footprint. So if you're thinking about London, we're thinking about this as a system, right? So what's coming in on the left-hand side is about 50% of those emissions, well, 58%, nearly 60% of those emissions coming from animal products, whilst they actually produce only 14% of our calories. And this is swimming around within London as the big consumer. And then what comes out is waste. And, you know, if we're thinking about this as a circular economy and in terms of using our waste sensibly, we should actually think of London as a way, as the waste in London, as a way to plough back into that circular economy, and thinking about, you know, food waste and surplus as being part of circling round into the system. Just to build on what Tom was saying about food waste, actually consumer waste is very important, but more is lost in supply chains. And there is some growing evidence of the fact that actually supermarket supply chains are very wasteful. They have high farm waste because they have cosmetic standards, and they routinely overproduce to make sure that they don't get left with a deficit. So in many cases, they'll ask farmers to produce 10 or 15% more than they need. and that's wasted. Whereas other supply chains are more nimble and more agile and better at using everything that they produce. And certainly direct to farmer supply chains like veg box schemes, markets, smaller supply chains and supply chains selling into smaller businesses and shops actually have a much less wasteful and much more sustainable supply chain, actually, because that waste is taken into account much better. So what's happening in London? Well, London declared a climate and nature emergency, brilliant. And the Mayor Sadiq Khan introduced a food strategy in 2018. And that strategy recognised two very important things, I think. The first, that there was a need to reduce emissions and improve diets. And secondly, that food insecurity and inequality was one of the biggest challenges for the food system in London. And recognising particularly that London's children are at risk of malnutrition and food insecurity. And so that leads us to policies, I think, which would meet the two. So make good, healthy and sustainable food more available to those on low incomes. And that really, for me, should be the strategy for London, rather than thinking about denying people beef or making people cut down. It should be about making good food more accessible and more affordable to those on low incomes. London has got its own food board, so we're quite well set up to have good systems in place to drive change on London as a whole. And it's also got a child obesity task force. And London actually was, I don't know if you're aware of this, but it was the first place in the world to introduce a ban. 2 minutes.
Yeah, you got 2 minutes.
Yeah. We'll rattle on. Thanks. We actually don't need to talk too much about the diet stuff because Tom's talked about it, but just to emphasize, most environmental organizations don't say we need to all go vegan. 2 or 3 times a week is optimal for the 2 or 3 times meat is optimal for the environment and for health, actually, because that is optimal. We are eating too much meat for our health as well at the moment. I wanted to include a few slides about this because I think a lot when it comes to eating, our diets, it feels like quite a personal decision and a difficult personal decision that we, and there's a lot of guilt associated with food. But actually, the large businesses that have shiny corporate responsibility strategies are making it difficult to make good choices. And so I want to encourage us all to think about the fact that these large businesses need to do a lot more. So McDonald's, for example, is the vegetarian option is a lot more expensive than the meat option. And the same goes for Burger King. And really, they should be moving to a model to expect that 2/3 to 3/4 of their customers will choose meat-free. That is the sustainable diet. And yet barely any choices, and it's all significantly more expensive. Same goes for Greggs. Vegan sausage roll, brilliant, but it's the same price as a sausage roll. And actually their vegetarian sandwich is more expensive than meat. So what hope do we have of consumers, especially those on low incomes, from making good decisions? And I would say that the responsibility lies with businesses there. What can we do? So I wanted Capital Growth. This is an online map of community food growing spaces in London. I'd really encourage you to have a look for one locally there, where you can go and volunteer, grow your own food and understand a bit more about food growing. Support public sector food to go more climate friendly. I know in your area, each school manages its own school meals. So that means that you might actually be able to have a bit of influence over what's served in your own school. And I'd encourage you to encourage them to go less and better meat and more vegetables. And wherever you can, where there's a food waste collection service, make sure you use it, because food waste is a huge greenhouse gas emitter because it releases methane when it goes into the ground. So please take up the services where you've got them, or just start composting if you have a garden. And support your local independent food economy, because for all the reasons that I said before, supermarkets and those big supply chains are very wasteful, and smaller markets, independent street markets, farmers markets, of course, box schemes and local food delivery schemes. And you've got a milkman delivery in your area. So I'd encourage you to think about doing that as well, as a just way to put more of your spend into the independent food system. I'm sorry I've gone over, but next steps for London.
Yeah, This will have to be your last slide, and you will have to speed it up. You've already gone over a little bit, so.
I'm sorry. This is my last slide, but I just wanted to put, there was a question about what can be done, what we can do next in London, and these would be my big 5 things. So it would be using food as a way to rejuvenate our high streets after reopening after COVID. Thinking about a climate-friendly advertising policy, which a few councils are starting to do now, and one for you perhaps think about. New nature-friendly farms in the urban fringe. This is a picture of Sutton Community Farm. Refill points in Transport for London stations to normalise refill rather than bottled water, and stopping pensions and investments supporting high-emitting agribusiness. And I'll leave it there. Thank you. And I apologise for going over.
No, thank you. That was really interesting, and I know there's a lot to be said on this, so apologies for rushing you. There was a question. There was just a direct question in the chat. Somebody was asking. You said that UK was 5th nation to introduce, but they didn't catch the last part of your sentence.
It was a policy to ban advertising of junk food. So high fat, salt and sugar has been restricted across the TfL network now. And it's also been adopted in councils as well. I know where I am in Southwark, there's a ban on advertising junk food now, and alcohol and tobacco, I think. So it's just the policies that the council has the power to implement. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Good question, thank you.
Okay, so if you could take your slide down, Ruth, that would be really helpful while I introduced our next speaker. So the next speaker is Noreen Glaves. And Noreen is the founder and the CEO of Feed Me Good, which is a local business in Brent, a local sustainable business for reducing waste. So if I can ask Noreen to come in and start her presentation, please.
Hi everyone, let me just make this into presentation mode, 1 second. Yeah, perfect. Hi everyone, my name is Noreen Glames. I'm the founder and CEO of Feed Me Good. I'm also a Brent resident. I've been here most of my life. I have a business called Feed Me Good, which is your best source of food education. I founded it in 2014, and I've been helping residents across Brent and also the UK reduce their food waste and helping them to live happy, healthy, sustainable lives. So I'm just giving you a bit of information about myself. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about the issues that I found when it came to not only just Brent food waste, but also as a whole when it comes to the nation. When we think of food waste, it actually goes hand in hand with behavioural changes as well. So example, sometimes it might be that you buy certain ingredients when you go to the supermarket, and then when you get home, you don't tend to have the time to cook the food. So example, what I did with IKEA, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, is actually put 10 commonly known ingredients or foods that are often thrown away. And that's basically your bread, that could also be your potatoes, your salad. A lot of us have a lot of intentions to be healthy or to sometimes even do trends like veganuary, but it's not always sustainable. And the thing is, when we think about food waste or even sustainability, you have to go back to the basics. It has to be about diversity and actually understanding the different ethnic groups and how do they come in, what are the practices that your grandma might have used when it was back in the day, when it was World War II, or when you came from a different country. You know, you looking at people's diets and actually seeing how do they utilize vegetables, how do they actually have sustainable practices that they may not even call it sustainability. You know, it's the same thing as saying about vegans. Rastafarians would be using ITAL for years. It's just all these different wordings. So it's very, very important that if we're going to be talking about being sustainable, is that it's a group effort. It's understanding the teachings from the different ethnic groups, and how collectively as a community, like Brent is very multicultural, how do we come together to teach one another so we can actually help to actually reduce our food waste? And also as well, when it comes to the traditional methods of cooking, you know, everyone has different diets, everyone has different methods, but most common ingredients tend to be very similar. Like if you look at a diet from, say, Middle Eastern compared to Latin American, they have very similar spices and herbs. So it's very important to understand that connection, and actually that helps people to have that dialogue. As you guys can see over here, I have my beautiful bento box, which I've done with my CHEP program, and that is actually tofu with sweet potatoes. So I've incorporated a vegan way of making healthy donuts for our children, but also helping them to have the vegetables, as I am a veg advocate for the Food Foundation. So my work with them is very, very important, especially when it comes to, like Ruth was saying, the pledges for the retailers. So I actually work with all the retailers with the UK, which I'm very excited about. So what I wanted to do here is talk about my journey. Now, I'm actually very proud of this slide, because my transition from doing work with IKEA, I'm actually known as the IKEA girl, because I do a lot of food waste guru stuff with them across the UK. So you can actually find me in every IKEA kitchen and also billboard, because I'm very known for the work that I do. But the reason why I wanted to actually do my program with IKEA when I had the opportunity for the Wembley store is that I wanted to incorporate a bit more of my lessons or teachings for my How to Be a Smart Food Shopper program. I wanted to help to even further reduce my food waste, also helped me to grow my own food, recycling, and that helped me to start my behavioral changes and also really bring diversity inclusion into the work that I do with Feed Me Good. And what I wanted to do is show you, this is the booklet that I made for IKEA, which you can still get available, which I spoke to you about the commonly known ingredients. And over here, I've got my beautiful Hamina, who's one of my chief operating officers. And then over here, we've got Aileen and Sharon. And this team is amazing, because they actually are the ones who helped us to make changes, behavioral changes, with Surrey University on Live Lagom. Live Lagom stands for just the right amount, and I was able to learn about the behavioral changes that I was incorporating from reducing my food waste and also recycling and actually growing my food at home. I don't have a balcony. I actually did it on my windowsill, so that was quite helpful as well. And that also, this lovely guy here, this is the CEO of IKEA. So thank you very much for the opportunity. So, like I said, we have solutions, guys. Now, the thing is, we have this amazing program called How to Be a Smart Food Shopper. I've actually diversified it to actually pull it into Food Good 4, but also Plate on Point. And the reason why I've done this is because I actually teach you how to save money on your food shopping, but also how to understand labels. My background is public health, dietetics and manufacturing. So I have a full 21 years experience in this industry, which is amazing. But what I'm really proud about right now is that we actually was able to be funded by Guys and St. Thomas's Trust with UCL University to do our CHEP program, which is actually based in Brent and Lambeth. We did it for Kingsby Green Primary School and Chalk Hill Primary School. We had 1,560 children engaging in our workshops, which is one of our modules over here, which they learn about food, nutrition, sustainability. They learn about growing their own little gardeners and so forth. And then this is the other program that I'm looking to launch in the near future, as I'm doing a lot of partnership work with Durkin Construction. So my whole thing when it comes to solutions is understanding about the demographic, about the community, but also how do these changes or how do these behaviors fit into the community? So example, if I have, say, a Brazilian community, I understand about their diet and how do they have this thing, I don't really understand the word to say it, but what they do is when they get towards the, say, before they go their food shopping, they would actually clear everything out of the fridge and cupboards and they will make something to eat. Now, what I do is I call that a wild card food. So when you're thinking about actually buying your food shopping, don't be distracted by having your children making noise or distractions in your supermarkets. They are there to make you spend more money. That's the truth, yeah? So what you need to do is have a list, okay? Once you have a list, you'll be able to do family planning with your children or your spouse or partner. Maybe it might just be on yourself. And then what you do, you try to stick to that list. A lot of the foods that you have that's unhealthy is always going to be at eye level. And that is the truth. This is scientific as well, okay? So what you want to do is fruit and vegetables are always going to be more expensive. I don't understand why. It's really silly to me. But at the same time, you would really benefit, as you guys can see from my beautiful bento boxes. This is vegan. These ones are mixtures of colors of food. They're here to entice you, but as you can see from this slide over here, food tells you what to do. It gives you the DNA that says, I want to feel healthy, I want to feel good, and so forth like that. Or it might be that you might not feel so great either. So you have to be thinking you've got to match your nutrients to your food. And that's what we really pride ourselves on in Feed Me Good as well. And I wanted to talk to you guys about this. We've just been awarded money from Brent, which is holiday and fun activity and holiday activities and fun foods. We will be providing this service to our Brent children, which we're very excited for, in Chalk Hill Primary School. It starts on the 10th of August. And we're teaching the kids our CHEP program. They're learning about nutrition, they're learning about cooking skills, they're learning about gardening, they're learning about Precious Planet, which is our sustainable model. So they're learning about recycling and how the Mother Earth works and so forth like that. And it's really important for us to educate our children. But what I love about even the CHEP program, we've incorporated our How to Be a Smart Food Shopper. So we've been working with the parents of 2 of the primary schools and also St. John's the Divine in Lambeth to really understand what is healthy eating, what is sustainability, how is it relatable to you in your community? Are you supported by your council or your public health? And how can we really break down these barriers when it comes to food security or food inequality, but also sustainability will always come into that. So my message is when you think about being sustainable, move the words out the way. What you want to think about is, what traditions does my family have? How does it relate to me having more consumption of vegetables? How does it relate to me having a very wide range of nutrients that my body will need, especially now when it comes to building your immunity, which is very, very important as well. And like I said, if you guys want more information from me, I've got a website called Feed Me Good, and I'm also on LinkedIn, and this is my Instagram. I'm very active on this. And, thank you guys for this opportunity. But like I said, when it comes to sustainability, it's for everyone. It's not just a word, it's a way of life. And I've been utilizing my way of life and embedded it in my organization for the last 6 years. And I've been working with more than 3,100 people, spreading the message when it comes to helping people to not only lead happy, healthy lives, but sustainable lives, because it's more embedded in their culture and their way of life as well. Because sustainability is for all people, to all of us. So yeah, I think that's it. Let me stop sharing. Was that nice on time?
Absolutely perfect, Ruth. I didn't even need to give you the 2-minute warning because I could see that you were coming to an end. So I really appreciate your timing and really interesting talk. So thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next and last speaker, who is very, very local. It's our own Katie Pascoe, who is from one of our local mutual aid groups. And I thought I might explain a mutual aid, but I'll leave that to Katie to do. But he's going to be talking about one of our very localised groups, food growing group in the borough. So Katie, over to you.
Thanks, Shazia. I'm super excited to be here today. Certainly when we started this project, the back end of last year, I didn't imagine we would be where we are today, and it's a really exciting time ahead for us. So let me introduce you to Let's Grow Brent. I have a day job, as do most of our people in our mutual aid groups across Brent, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how we started up on the next slide. But I work as a health economist at J&J, Johnson & Johnson, and just being involved in these projects with mutual aid has been huge. We've got some exceptionally talented people that have been involved in not only this initiative, but some of our other initiatives as well. So mutual aid in Brent started up at the start of COVID last year, and I've left some details here for those that want to know a little bit more about mutual aid projects. But it's really just a bunch of neighbours helping neighbours, and we don't believe in hierarchy. We work together in solidarity, just trying to help one another. None of us are at optimal peak time all the time. All of us need help from time to time, and when we work together as a community and do initiatives such as this, we're all much better off. So the Let's Grow Brent initiative started at the back end of last year, In Kensal Green Mutual Aid, we had a few neighbours that had come out of hospital from COVID or had generally been isolating and not been able to do their own gardens. So we pulled together a small gardening team because we knew people also wanted to get out and help people. And, you know, with some of the restrictions relaxing, we knew that we could get small groups of people together to help our neighbours do their gardens. So we established a small group, which quickly grew to 25 people, which was a little bit crazy. And then we thought, well, we probably need to do something else with all these people that want to garden. So we hooked up with another mutual aid group who was also had a shared interest, mainly in food growing. And we thought, let's try a food growing project. No idea how to do this, just a bunch of neighbours wanting to do something a bit differently. So we'd also uncovered through mutual aid, as Shazia talked to, a vast food need across the borough. There are so many people that need so much help. And there have been some amazing food banks. I know Leslie's on the call today from Granville. We're exceptionally grateful for all the work she's done. You know, Leroy and Housden Mutual Aid, Giles at Gift Your Neighbour, Darkshire when she was running her community kitchen, provided a lot of food across Brent at a time when people were really, really struggling. And we thought if we can grow some of that food and get communities involved in food growing, then that's a really exciting project and might start to address some of that, that food need. So what did we do? We brought a wide group of people together. We just put a call out and said, we're interested in doing this. We don't really know how to do it. Come and join us on this journey. And these are just some of the partners that we've pulled in so far. Some people are, some groups are people that we work with to understand more about food growing. We're not a bunch of experts, we need to learn. Some of our partners are places that we grow food, and some of our partners are places that we will eventually give food to. So all this partnership network kicked off last year. And on top of that, we had a lot of community donations in terms of soil, plants, and money to get the ball rolling. It's very hard to turn a blank site into a food growing site without a little bit of money. I think you'll be impressed. We've only used about, I think, £800 to date on our site. So it doesn't take much money, but we do need a little bit of money and a lot of people power. So this was our first little site. We went to Housden Town Gardens. We have an amazing lady there, Beth, who we work with and is a really strong member of our network. And she said, why don't you look after this allotment bed? It's a small one, but we can make a start here. As you can see, it is a little bit little, but it's where we grow some of our salads and our seedlings, and some of our community do some great learning projects there. And it's a place where we can involve the children as well. This was the first larger allotment we were borrowing. We have a lovely lady, Polly, at the Longston allotments in Housden, who offered us her plot. She was caught overseas with COVID and couldn't look after her plot. And she said, well, if you want to work over most of the plot and leave me a little bit, you can have use for the plot for the 2020 growing season, 2021 growing season. So we started at the start of this year. You can see there was a lot of work, a lot of grass to dig up, a lot of effort to put in. And we have a good little team of volunteers who actually moved a greenhouse. We got given a greenhouse, that's ours at the end there. And so we have another great space for growing our food. You can see we've got a lot of potatoes that are coming our way. We have currants, we have pumpkins, we have a lot of tomatoes, and we've harvested quite a bit of chard as well. We have a chard forest down the other end, which we've just trimmed back, and are going to plant a whole lot of kale in a few weeks' time. So super exciting. But the most crazy project we've decided to take on is at a local high school, Newham Catholic College. And I think this is the greatest opportunity in terms of how we can work. Being inside a school provides a secure site, often a lot of open space with a lot of sun and access to water. So it's an ideal place to start thinking about food growing. And this is just one of the parts of the site that we've been offered. We are limited at the moment by funding, because we need some funding to put some extra soil on. We use a no-dig method, which I'll explain in a moment. But you can see that it's a big piece of land. So when I saw this, I was quite scared, to be honest. But we quickly got the team to work, and our no-dig method involves laying down cardboard and then dumping on top soil. We get wood chips donated to us from a local tree surgeon, so that's something we don't need supply of, but we do need good soil to grow in. So that's the main thing that we need, and the no-dig approach is amazing. It doesn't destroy the soil structure underneath. Those of you that know more about this than I do will understand the benefits of that, but it's an easy approach. It just means you need some good soil to throw on top of it. And I've been super surprised. This is quite incredible. So we started here in April, as you can see. We hadn't got a dump of soil then. But we finally got a dump of soil in May, so just over, I guess, 7-8 weeks ago now. And you can see we pretty quickly got to work planting seeds. We just planted seeds straight in the ground. You can see Taziana and Simon, our site leads there, throwing in the seeds, which I thought surely they won't just come up. And this is actually 2 weeks ago, and it's even crazier now. So we have tomatoes. We harvested our first courgettes at the weekend, which are going to the school's food bank, which has also operated throughout COVID, providing food to the local community surrounding the school. So it's pretty exciting. So we have these 3 pilot sites testing out what we can grow as a community. We're looking for new sites, but we're also mindful not to stretch ourselves at the moment. But we think we have a good blueprint, if you like, to take to other areas of Brent. All it takes is an enthusiastic bunch of volunteers. We operate via WhatsApp, which is pretty annoying, I guess, for some people that don't want to be on social media, but actually WhatsApp has been the only way we can effectively communicate with both our neighbours and volunteers who want to get involved. I wasn't a big WhatsApp user, and I don't know what we would have done without it, to be quite honest. That and Google Docs. So it's super exciting. So I just have a few asks today. If you want to join the Let's Grow Brent gardening team, please email us at Kensal Green Mutual Aid. Equally, if you're interested in starting up your own little volunteer group somewhere else in Brent, maybe you have a small piece of land, I advise you to start small. Also give us an email and we can give you some guidance on how you might do that. As I said, the main thing for us is getting some donations in for soil. We have plenty more bits of land around Newman Catholic College that we want to turn into growing spaces. So if you have £5–10, please donate to our open collective. You'd be surprised at what we can do with a small amount of money. And follow us on our Facebook and Instagram to see our progress. We do a lot of our community work via Facebook and Instagram. And if you would like to know more about how to get involved in Brent Mutual Aid projects or join your local Brent Mutual Aid group, you can find all that information on the Brent Mutual Aid website. Thank you, Shazia.
Thank you, Katie. Amazing. You also were, exactly on. So thank you very much for keeping to time. Really, really interesting, and really personally, really lovely to see, because I remember Katie and I and others talking about the seed of an idea that you had maybe a year ago or so. So it's really, really lovely to see what you've done with it, actually. I'm really impressed. Okay, so now, there's your timer. Sorry. You have 5 seconds left. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pose a few questions to the panel. To be honest, we've had quite a few questions in the chat. It's been some interesting conversation going on in there, but quite a few of them have been responded to in one way or the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take 3 or 4 key things that I think are relevant for the panel and open this up. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is to all of the panel, and it's really about power and where power sits. So there were a couple of questions in the chat about the power that the council has in terms, in this case, I think it was particularly about businesses who are serving food, and if we can do anything to kind of encourage them not to be, you know, selling so much meat, etc. And the council has limited powers in those sorts of areas, but I just wanted to talk about the dynamics of power and who has the power. And I'd just be really interesting to see for this agenda what each of the panel, what comments you might just like to make on that. So if I just open it up first of all to Ruth, and then we'll just go through the panel.
It's a really good question, and I think part of the challenge with food and climate change has been that we've led for so long we've been told to believe that we are responsible for our diets, and if you eat the wrong food then it's kind of your fault, when there's so many other powerful actors in the food system that are, as Noreen said, you know, they want to make us buy certain food, you know, they know all the tricks about influencing our choices. So, you know, when it comes to energy, you know, we look at Shell as the problem, but when it comes to food, we're very keen to sort of blame ourselves for our diets. And I think that can make it quite difficult to sometimes to point the finger at who needs to change. And, you know, I think that national government has got an awful lot of questions to answer. They released a food strategy a few weeks ago, and whilst it was quite good in some areas, it was very weak on climate friendly diets and very weak on anything that would have really helped to get really good food to people with low incomes, like improving the school fruit and veg scheme and the Healthy Start vouchers that would really have boosted fruit and veg uptake in lower incomes. So, but there are, you know, councils can, there's loads of, I mean, lots of great things that councils do, like perhaps not influencing the big business, but supporting the alternative, like offering peppercorn rents for startup businesses and making sure that facilities that they need are there, lending out space for packaging, and, you know, where local community groups need facilities, offering them where they can, and also supporting through their own procurement. So making sure that councils are buying locally and buying good food for meetings and conferences and events, and schools and care homes where that's applicable. Yes, that would be my main things. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. That's really, really helpful, really interesting. And so if I can pass the question on to Noreen, and then I'll come to you, Katie, at the end.
I think it goes both ways, to be honest. I think it goes to the person, the individual. Like I can be a testament to say that me being on my Live Logom journey, but also raising Feed Me Good, I was able to help different communities that, especially during COVID, we still kept our doors open, and we was getting a lot of our students actually growing their own fruit and vegetables in their gardens, in their balconies and so forth like that, as a way of helping them with their mental health. But then at the same time, I also thought that a lot of the messaging is not predominantly diverse or inclusive. And I also feel like when it comes to the actual council, there can be more that's done. If you look at different boroughs, like I work all over London, I'm based in Brent, but we have so much chicken and chip shops. We have all these different food places that we could actually have a healthier version of, like, you know, more vegetarian options, you know, as an actual business, but we don't. So we always be thinking about, okay, we want to be sustainable, but then we don't actually really bring more solutions forward. And I think, to be honest with you, I've been saying the same thing for years, and I would really like to have some changes, not only just systematic changes in the actual food environment, like the actual systems from you know, manufacturers, retailers, all the way down to consumers, because we do have a lot of power. But I also would like to see healthier options for our young people, but also teenagers. Like there's a large amount of like mental health issues with our young people right now, especially from COVID. You know, there's a lot of suicide. It gets quite deep. But then there's another thing about identity. You know, what is healthy eating? How does that even fit into sustainability? And people think that sustainability is mainly middle class white, going to a you know, plastic free from shop. That's quite alarming, because we've all had sustainable practices from our families, maybe be back at home or maybe be here, that they may not speak English as their first language, but who's to say that they're not being sustainable? So I think it's really important that it goes in different levels. It goes in the actual consumer itself and understanding what is sustainability to you and how you can get your whole community involved, or also just yourself, because one person can change the world, but also goes into the councils like, can you give us opportunities to have these programs that we do in-house in schools that we're going to be benefiting the schools and also the community, but also have food establishments that are not giving our kids crap, not being rude, but it's true. I'd rather make sure that we actually, if we're going to be sustainable in the future and actually decrease the amount of health inequality, especially when it comes to our Black and ethnic community, then we need to all collectively to come together and make those systematic changes, because it affects all of us.
Thank you. That's really really important. Some of the stuff you've said. Just on the planning issue and about chicken shops. So I did a piece of work on this in the previous borough that I worked for in East London, and as if any of you have been to East London, it is, if you think it's bad in Brent, it is really bad in East London. It's in literally every other corner. And actually councils don't have as much power around the types of use that is allowed. And so one of the powers the council did have was to do with the quality of the oil that's used. So one of the things they did was that the oil that gets used in these chicken shops is it's used like 100 times to the point where it becomes really poisonous for the individual. And so one of the things that they could do, the council could do, was around health and safety. But I think that whole planning issue, we'll take that away, because I would like to test that out a bit more. So we'll commit to taking that away and having a look at it, and certainly talk about it.
Can I just add one more thing before I finish? I actually did that for Brent 16 years ago. I actually went into the chicken and chip shops. I actually looked at the menu, looked at the customer service, and actually I did the nutrition analysis. So I've done that for 2 boroughs already. I do understand when it comes to different boroughs, but I do also will say that the council, when we look at everyday residents like myself, we are looking at the council to support more of us and to be able to actually have more structures in place that, yes, you definitely cannot be controlling who is, having the shop, but there could be more training. There could be more, facilitation of people like myself who can actually do nutrition analysis and actually make them have more sustainable diets that's going to be impacting our children and the families. Because if you look at sustainability, it goes into food waste, but it also goes into health and well-being. So it's like an important thing that we collectively work together in order to make real changes, especially into the borough that we work and live in.
Thank you. Okay, so Katie, I'm just going to bring you in maybe a more localized perspective, but or not, maybe just.
No, I think you know what I'm going to say. I think it's the powers in the community. You can bring a bunch of people together and make a small difference. It's only going to be small to start with, but I think we've all got some big ambitions. I mean, my favorite quote, I just pulled it up before: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And it's a powerful thing. You just need a few people with going in the same direction, and someone to kind of bring it all together. And are happy to share our learnings, what we've done here and around Kensal Green and Houston. It's not difficult. It takes time, and it takes people with some energy, and that's all it ever is. So
yeah, we should definitely. I mean, we're about to in a few weeks we will be launching a grants program for the community on small projects, sustainable projects that they can get started. And I think yours is a really good example of what can be done. With some energy, and power does sit in the consumer as well. So, okay, so Leroy's put a question in the chat which says we have to be careful not to overdo it, as a lot of people live off the meat business. And it's just prompted me to ask a question to the panel about affordability. So what I've heard from a lot of I've been talking to quite a lot of our churches, and about this whole environment sustainability agenda. And what they said was, it's not that our communities don't want to be sustainable, don't want to make these changes, but it's not very affordable. And I know from my own experience, it's quite expensive if you want to change and switch. So I just wondered what panel, if we can be brief, because I do have a couple more questions, but just generally, I'll open it up to the panel if you want to make comments about affordability. Welcome to anybody to come in. Marie?
Yeah, can I, so just to kind of give you a bit of context. So I actually did My student, Gavin, he used to live in a homeless shelter. He challenged me. I did £60 for 3 weeks based on a family of 4. I fed them breakfast, lunch, teas, coffees, drinks, everything from packed lunches. I posted that in IKEA group, and that's what got me noticed. So when it comes to being sustainable, it's not necessarily that it's not affordable, it's having the knowledge to know how to make it affordable. So that's basically what it comes down to. And that's the reason why I would even say for myself personally, that How to Be a Smart Future came forward from literally, my lived experiences. So you can be sustainable on your budget. You just have to have the know-how. And that's the reason why the work in Feed Me Good is really important, because we are able to understand the different demographics and how they eat and their behaviors, what they buy, and then collectively teach them that public health nutrition with the manufacturing side so they can be sustainable. Because we would always say that it's unsustainable, but it's just that a lot of the things that's out there makes it to think it's not sustainable. But the truth is you can be really sustainable on a budget for this.
That's really interesting. I'll be interested in hearing more about the your little, your thing that you did about £60 a week, because that could be shared with other people as well. So.
It was 3 weeks, 25 days I did it for. Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on that before I move on to the next
Yeah, I think a behaviour change is always tricky. We all know that. And I think in terms of how we do that change, we need to make sure that people are excited to make that change in their own life and bring people together so that they feel, collective and part of something in doing that. If you're a single mother at home or a single dad at home, planning out healthy meals is probably the last thing you're thinking of in your incredibly busy week of trying to organize everything. But if we could bring people together to form some sort of little community or group around that, then it becomes a fun thing for them to do. They can share meal plans, they can share the chaos in their lives. It becomes something that's important to them and gives them a source of joy, not just something they feel that they're, again, not doing right. I should do better. And that's what we've learned from the Growing Project is bringing people together provides connection, and it provides relationships, and it provides an opportunity for people to share things and share experiences and have a better life, because you're building relationships with other people.
Great, thank you, Katie, that's really helpful. Ruth, did you want to come in, or should I move on to? I've got another question that's directly for you, Ruth, actually.
Oh, right. Well, just quickly, I think the only thing I'd say is that the cheap food thing is really hard to tackle, because actually cheap food comes at a high cost, especially when it's cheap meat. And the problem is that we don't see the cost, but somebody else is bearing it, and it's going to be the next generation. It was going to be our generation, actually, and it's going to disproportionately affect people that are poorer already. And the most exploited people, probably, the big cause of food poverty is insecure work and low wages, as well as housing costs. And nowhere are jobs cheaper, more badly paid, or more exploited than in the food system, than in the bad food system. But where jobs are really good is in the alternative food system, and growing food that's more sustainable, and outdoor jobs that give people flexibility. So everything that we do to invest in a good food system helps to tackle that problem. But I completely agree with you. The issues are much bigger than the problem of the food of the low wages is a government issue. It is not just something that we can solve here. But the problem is that it's not accounted for. The costs aren't accounted for in the price, and that makes certain things very cheap when other things should be more affordable.
Yeah, very good point. Okay, all right, Ruth, I've got a question directly for you. This is about beef. So even if the beef is local, how do we know what that the food is given is actually local? And could the food that's given come from deforested land? So basically, it's about how do we know? This is goes back to information again, doesn't it?
Yeah, labelling isn't very good at the moment. And actually, one of the approaches that the government is proposing is to improve labelling, because when we get an import of new beef from Australia, it will be the way that will allow customers to choose British beef over Australian beef, and therefore make it okay to sign this trade deal. What I would say is there's limitations to better labelling, because you won't know if it's in a ready meal or if it's on a pizza. because you know there's only so much that you can put on a label, and you will never be able to start listing all those ingredients. And I think, you know, labeling can only go so far. I think that we should just have better food. Like there's only so much that consumers can find on a menu and choose, especially if you're busy and you're, you know. But yeah, you're supposed to have the country of origin on food, so you should know where it's come from if you're buying a whole packet of mince. But it's when it's in ready meals and stuff that it's much more difficult. But if you don't know and you're in a restaurant, you should ask. Or if you're in any business, you know, if you're in a business, you should ask. And if you can't find that information, you should think about shopping somewhere else, I would say.
Shazia, you're on mute.
Thank you, Katie. I was happily chatting away there to myself. Sorry, I was just saying that at the points you're making, Ruth, that actually that goes back to the power of the consumer. So the more questions we ask, maybe the more that starts to change the behaviour of others as well. So I was just thinking about myself as a Muslim. It's almost impossible at one point to get meat that was either free range or organic. And I actually had to stop eating meat. I don't eat much meat anyway, but I do eat some. But now I can go into quite a few butchers and I can get free range and I can get organic because that demand has been made. So again, it's the consumer, but it's taken a long time. But you know, just an example there, really. Okay, I'm gonna ask. The last question was about the options of delivery, having things delivered to your home, food boxes, etc., and buying in shops themselves, and the kind of balancing out the carbon and the nuisance that's caused by cars and delivery vans, versus going to a shop yourself and walking there and, you know, buying fresh and all the rest of it. So I just wondered if people had any views on that. That's a question or sort of a comment that's been put in the chat. Anybody want to? I'm going to open it up to the panel, so feel free to come in.
It goes both ways. So like example, I actually like to support my local. I try to grow stuff with my schools as well, just to kind of like everyone can see where the food comes from. But at the same time, a lot of our foods are not, they don't actually origin is in England. So example, if you think of like Afro-Caribbean ingredients, we have to get that imported. So the thing is I think it's important to, when you can, really buy in season. You know, that's going to really be your best bet when it comes to reducing the food miles, but also getting more of the nutrients out of your fruit and vegetables or the food that you're going to be having. There's one company that I partner with called Box Tropics. They actually deliver Afro-Caribbean ingredients to your door, which I felt was very helpful, especially for our communities that were shielding during COVID and also right now. You can definitely go to your local shops, but I'm finding that actually, you know, a lot of our children or people are getting allergens. Allergens are getting more prevalent right now than even before. And having organic, if you can afford to live like Riverford Farm or Avon Cole, any of these type of ones, or I think there's another one, the odd one. That's also very helpful. Yeah, that's also very helpful because you can buy in season. You know, vegetables don't cost a lot of money. I think what we do is we keep thinking of things need to be looking very pretty. The vegetable is not saying, oh my God, don't eat me today, I look so ugly. It's not saying that. It's basically like you should have vegetables and fruit that looks in its natural state. That means it might look a bit rough around the edges, but the nutrition is going to be giving you more nutrients as opposed to having something prim and proper. So I'm really big as a veg advocate for the Food Foundation to really show families and like consumers that you should really try and go for those wonky vegetables, or you should try different options, or maybe even have a gardening club. You know, you might have a little bit, they have a little bit, and you barter together, because that way you're being sustainable, but you know exactly what you've grown. And you also are adding to your economy because you're saving money as well. So I think it's important to understand what vegetables you can buy in season in the UK and look at other options if you have to, your food is not native to the UK. I think that's really important to understand that, because a lot of our foods, especially in Brent, we don't have traditional English food. We have Asian food, Muslim, everyone's got different cuisine styles. So it's really important to understand how can you get that, reducing the miles, the air miles, or grow it locally, so to speak.
Thank you. Ruth, did you want to say anything? Because I think you might have mentioned that in your presentation, but I might have got that wrong.
I don't have much to add, actually, except there was a really interesting case where Westminster Council did decide that they wanted to prohibit certain driver vehicles, like mopeds in certain areas, because they were causing such a noise and air pollution problem. And actually that meant that they switched over to electric vehicles and electric scooters and stuff. And it was because of noise and air pollution, actually, rather than direct like CO2. But it does look like more councils are kind of looking at that as something that they, delivery vehicles and supporting electric scooter rollout and stuff. And it looks like it's, there's more going in that direction.
Thank you very much. I've just noticed a few times as well, Granville, one of our local providers, is doing quite a lot on this, and they've just put in the chat that they have organic vegetable boxes aimed at low-income families, which is great, and they provide food for North European, African, Caribbean vegetables as well, which is brilliant. So just giving them a little plug there. So my last question is just if you could give the council one thing that you thought they could do on this agenda, what would it be? And if we can be practical, because I know people think we have many gifts and we really are very limited in what gifts we have. But if you think there's one thing we could do, it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts. So I'm going to start with Katie.
I think a big one is, getting the word out to local schools that we can grow and we can give back to the community, and giving us some soil. Those are my two requests.
Okay. we'll go back and see if we can find you some soil. Okay. So Noreen.
I would say, well, we're also working in schools as well, so we can add into that. But I would also say bringing more diversity, actually having a better understanding of the different communities that we serve in Brent and how collectively we can come together to be sustainable, but also to really bring health equality to Brent, which would be very important as well moving forward.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ruth?
Mine would be two things. The first, I would trying to get Wembley Stadium to serve planet-friendly diets, because that would be so cool and it would just be really influential, because they've got loads of money as well. So they would be really good spokespeople for the wider sports movement. We saw how powerful the Olympics was, right? It's so good to have a champion like that. And then secondly, you get your land registry and identify what space you might have that's available for food growing, and then on the website put a sign-up sheet so that if people are really interested in accessing land, then they can sign up, and then you can see if you can match people. Just get an idea of demand and then find a way of matching people to space that you might have. I know they do that in, I think, Bristol, Brighton do it, so you can sign up online. I think that'd be a great thing, because you've got some really good space.
Yeah, that's really helpful. What somebody's put, would be great if the council could work with community and mutual aid groups to identify and gain access to unused green spaces around Brent that can be used for community food growing. Kelly is our lead on this, and I know that as part of the sustainability and the greening piece of work that we're doing, part of that is about trying to find these bits of land and identify them, and it's not always straightforward, but it's certainly something that we've got in our ambitions to do. So it's just good to hear it, to be reiterated. So thank you, really, really grateful for your ideas, and we will certainly try and take those forward. So we've got 2 minutes left. So really all I wanted to say was thank you very, very much to all 3 of you for your presentations, and to Tom for his as well. Really grateful for your input. It was really nice to get that blended perspective, national to kind of all the way down to local, and what's happening on our own doorstep. Hopefully people have taken something away from that. I certainly have. We have been recording it, so we'll probably use it through some of our social media as well to promote it, etc. And we hope to do more webinars. So please, for those that are listening, do look at our website and do keep in touch and see what others we're promoting. I just wanted to mention the Brent Environment Network as well, and I know that Nadia put the link in the chat, but we have about 500 people or groups who have already joined, so that's great. But this is about trying to share the things that we talked about today and create that kind of community so that people can access information easily and importantly talk to each other as well. So please keep an eye out for that and get all the details from our website. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we're finishing with 1 minute spare. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for speaking.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
See you later. Thank you. Jan, have we shut it down?